Hey guys, I just wanted to say before we start the episode that we have a Patreon. You can subscribe over there. There are multiple tiers. There's a $2 tier where you get extra bonus episode every other week. There's a $5 tier where you get bonus content every single week. Or you can just toss us $1 if you like what we do.
And all tiers get you into our Patreon Discord.
Where you can hang out. We're there hanging out, talking about weird shit, talking about wrestling, talking about TV shows.
So if you like to keep It Gets Weird ad-free, that's a good... No, I don't want to do that. Anyway, that was a good take, Jules. We'll put that in the bin for the future.
And you're firing Kyle?
Yeah, we're going to fire Kyle.
Okay.
Welcome to It Gets Weird, our comedy show where we explore the unusual, the unbelievable, and the unexplained to try to make your world a little weirder. I'm Niall.
And I'm not Kyle.
You're not Kyle. No, as you...
Jump scare.
Yeah, jump scare. We switched out hosts again. Kyle is indisposed.
Everybody likes it better when I'm on anyway. This is established lore.
Yeah, it is a Discord thing of people always be like... Anytime one of Kyle or I is gone and you sub in, everyone in the Discord tries really hard to be like, no, we do like you, but...
Given the choice between either of you or me, everyone who listens to this podcast would pick me every time.
Yeah.
And if they wouldn't, they're not listening anymore at this point, so I can say whatever I want about them. And fuck those people.
Well, so speaking of that energy, today we're doing a Fuck Your Documentary episode.
Woo!
This is kind of a little out of the norm, but... Let me take 30 seconds and justify this.
Yeah, please do.
So,
because I'm not convinced.
Yeah. First of all, just starting off, William Friedkin died recently, and I like him as a director, and I like his movies a lot. We're watching this movie called Leap of Faith, William Friedkin on The Exorcist, because we've talked about how Exorcist is a cursed movie back in episode in the 200s somewhere. And we did a whole episode on the real story behind the real life exorcism that inspired The Exorcist a little while ago. So all those things together, it felt like this was justifiable as a bonus or as a main feed, but
And Kyle was unavailable to record.
Yeah.
The main reason is Kyle was unavailable to record. I feel like that should lead with that. I'm here because Kyle will be back next week, my baby.
So I couldn't do a documentary that requires a deep knowledge of alien lore. So we watched a thing about The Exorcist this week, and it was really interesting because, hey, spoiler alert, William Friedkin's a fucking interesting guy to listen to talk.
Yeah. So this is going to be a slightly less weird episode. I feel like we should say that at the top because this is a pretty normal documentary. It's not necessarily about the weird stuff that happened during The Exorcist. It's really just more genuine. It's just a 100 minute documentary about William Friedkin sitting in a room talking about his process on The Exorcist. And it's really interesting. And if you like William Friedkin or the film The Exorcist or just filmmaking in general, I think it is really, really interesting. But we're going to talk about it, but it's not necessarily conspiracy brained or alien themed.
I almost cut you off there because you almost jumped to the end of the episode where we talk about who this is for, but
I said it's interesting.
Yeah, so it's called Leap of Faith. William Friedkin on The Exorcist. It was released 2 years ago in 2020 or 2021. I think the way they do streaming dates versus the release is sometimes a little weird. But it is it.
I'm not one for intense regulation, but I will say I think that we as a society, as a people, globally need to agree on what a release date is.
Yeah.
What date do we all go by? Because I really don't like it when a movie is released in 2021 because it screened once at Cannes.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what it says when you Google it. But meanwhile, it came out in theaters. For me, the person Googling in America, fucking domestically, it came out in 2023, but it says 2021. There's stuff like that that really grinds my gears.
It's funny because this is one of the most niche things that we've shown.
We're getting into it.
Gotten mad about on the internet for this one, but I kind of agree. As someone who keeps a like new movies I watched in the year ranked list each year now for the last 2 years, I like kind of taking a look at my year in movies as a whole, you know.
It's a very specific problem to have. Because really, it doesn't matter.
No.
If we saw it in 2023 and it was new in theaters for us, we could just put it on our fucking list. But I need it to be accurate.
Well, I'm going to tie it into the fucking documentary because there is one thing that I straight up had a reaction to. Mm-hmm. They show clips of the film throughout and other films as well. So there's little like title cards at the bottom. And there are times where they were talking about specifically changes to some other stuff throughout when they re-released the movie in 2000, and it literally said The Exorcist, and then in quotations 2000.
I was very glad they did that.
Like,
I thought that was good because you shouldn't. That Exorcist should not be parenthetical the 70s date.
See, this is my thing. Like, I think it's the same movie, and I think even if you change,
he actively added things to it that aren't in the original cut.
So does that mean that like Miami Vice gets up the year of release updated for every cut that they release?
Absolutely, the cut should be the year that cut was released.
Okay,
like George Lucas adding fucking CGI to New Hope should absolutely be written with the year that he added the fucking CGI. That's a different cut of a movie. That's a new movie.
See, when you put it like that, specifically with the Star Wars, I start to see your point. Have you seen both versions of The Exorcist? Yes.
Okay. There's enough shit added to that if someone said to me, The Exorcist, what is it, 75?
Yeah,
what year did it actually come out?
Yeah, 75 or 76.
If someone said to me, do you want to watch The Exorcist parenthetical 1976? And it had the fucking, his mom's face in the window and stuff, I would be like, okay.
Yeah.
I'm very aware that that's a different movie. He went back and added stuff to it
fair.
In 2000, and so it says 2000.
I think I actually just agree with you now. Like, it was a thing that I had one line in the sand, and then I realized that when you put it into any context, it didn't make any sense. So
in a way, I understand bristling at it more than you would with something like A New Hope, though, because the stuff that he added to it was all stuff that is from the original. Like you're saying about even Miami Vice and stuff like that. He didn't go back and reshoot stuff. He didn't create whole cloth new content.
Yeah.
He just recut it a little bit. And so I think like there is an argument to be made that like, no, it's still that movie because those people still filmed all those things in 1975 or 6 or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's no new footage.
But I still think creatively it makes a new object.
Yeah, I can see that. Because like film bullshit.
I asked you if you've seen both, but we never actually explained the difference. Do you want to explain the difference?
So there is a slight difference to the ending, where at the end, I forget the exact differentiation, but it has like a happier ending in the new releasing, doesn't it?
I haven't seen the 2001 in a long time, so I honestly don't remember the ending being that different. But basically, The Exorcist came out in the 70s. Will you look up the actual year so I can
73.
stop? 73. It came out in 1973. And in the year, I guess, 2000, I didn't know this until, like you're saying, it came up in the parenthetical. Friedkin added multiple subliminal images in, I think, 3 or 4 scenes where you have the demon's face, you have Damien Karras's mother's face.
Yeah.
There's another one. There's like, somebody else.
Yeah.
But their faces are for just 2 or 3 frames added so that subliminally you get the feeling of having seen them. And so it's not one of those things where, like George Lucas, it's not like a huge fucking unearthing of like the movie. It's just he added a couple things to it. But I still think that if you're going to show me that version of it, I'd like to know that that's the version. That's fair.
You also are like, oh God,
I'm weird about versions of movies.
You are, because like there are times where like we haven't watched Blade Runner yet. If I said I haven't seen Blade Runner yet, do you think that that means that I want to go see it and I just haven't done it yet, or that?
Wait, who is that? That's a bit.
Yeah, it's a bit.
Who is that?
It is in. Let's see. It's a movie that we had 2 copies of when we moved in together because we both owned it.
Of course.
Yeah.
High fidelity.
Yep. Have you seen Evil Dead 2 yet?
When we split up, we might be on the record on a podcast saying this already, but I think that this is like, if I was going to sum up us as a relationship to someone. If I needed to say, like, in a nutshell, me and Niall dating, here's all you need to know about the two of us, is that when we started dating, we both owned High Fidelity on DVD.
Yes.
And every time we go through our DVDs, we have to have a discussion about, do we need to have both copies? Shouldn't we just have one because we live together and we don't both need to own High Fidelity? But then we both say and agree with each other, but if we ever broke up, what's the one movie that you would want to fucking have? It would be High Fidelity. So we keep it, and we have 2 copies of High Fidelity to this day.
Yeah.
Because, and I stand by that.
Yeah.
If we broke up and all of a sudden I lost my copy of High Fidelity because we decided in the breakup, like, and you got High Fidelity,
when we did
that would hurt too bad. Like, to break up and then also not have High Fidelity, that would hurt.
Yeah.
That'd be really painful.
It's the inevitable. Have you seen that like picture of the court where the couple is dividing up their Beanie Babies and their divorce?
For me and you, there's High Fidelity. I'm trying to think of other ones.
It was the Royal Tenenbaums. There was a lot of Wes
Royal
Anderson
Tenenbaums, stuff like that. Yeah, which we did go down to one on a couple of those.
Yes.
I kept my Rushmore. A lot of the Wes Andersons, we pretty much agreed, though. I said to you, if we go down to one, if we break up, they're mine. Like, that was a thing, because I owned the Criterions of those for such a long time that they are like precious objects to me outside of them being a movie. And so I was like, let's really get into the nitty gritty.
Yeah, let's get into the nitty gritty of our DVD collection,
pop culture collections.
So there is a slight,
it's so funny that it's High Fidelity. I have to say, it's so perfect. We both are so John Cusack in that movie. It's fucking pathetic.
So yeah,
just 2 John Cusacks dating each other.
This documentary was by a man named Alexander O. Philippe. I don't know exactly how it's pronounced because he never talks in the movie. This is one of, so okay, we actually had this discussion recently, and I think it was, what is your stance on documentaries? Do you want them to be,
they're good,
do you want them to be involved filmmaker,
the Werner Herzog question you're saying?
Yeah.
Should a documentarian be what does he say, a hornet that stings and tries to make things happen, or are you a fly on the wall who just observes?
Yeah.
Is that what you're asking?
Basically, yeah.
I think both are good.
Yeah, I've never really seen the need to I understand why you distinguish between the two, but I've never seen
they accomplish different things. I do think that they're different, and I think that it's worth having a conversation when you're talking about a documentary, like saying this was the kind where the documentarian is really involved in it. But like, I think that it is impossible to not influence something if you're filming it.
Oh, 100%.
I think that like the people who think that they're being really pure
and
creatively,
objective.
And objective, and just, I'm just observing, I'm just getting it on film. No, you're not, because that person knows you're filming them.
Yeah.
Like, they would have to not know they were being filmed. And then you get into a whole other thing where still, by compiling the footage and releasing it, you still are putting your spin on it.
Yeah.
Because you had to edit it.
Yep.
So like, there really is no way out of the fact that as a documentary filmmaker, your voice is coming through in it.
Yeah.
Because you made a documentary. You inherently have put your influence on it.
Yeah. I agree with that. And this one is specifically them asking William Friedkin questions, and he's kind of taking different jumping off points to talk about the movie. Now, I say they're asking him questions. You only ever hear the filmmakers once in this documentary. It's something that I, for some reason, really sticks in my brain is like anytime they break the rules of the documentary in my brain, you know?
When did we hear? I don't even remember.
I think I found where it was. So the only time that you actually hear the voice from off camera, not well mic'd, like they were not mic'd, of the filmmaker in this movie is, I believe, when he turns down Bernard Herrmann's score for the movie. There's a quick thing about, and you get the response of, that was one of the like worst days of my life, basically, from William Friedkin, turning down like his music, like he calls him the greatest composer of all time.
But you hear the filmmaker says something to him.
The filmmaker basically asks him if I don't have the exact
like
quote.
Was that difficult?
Yeah, like did you feel pressure to just take the score and use it? All kind of question.
See, I don't even remember hearing his voice. That's the thing, is like I believe you. I'm not correcting you, but just that I really like documentaries where you don't hear the person's voice at all.
I do too.
You can tell that there's an interview happening, but you don't hear it. But I love and I get really excited when in a documentary like that, all of a sudden there's subtitles and you can really faintly hear somebody who doesn't have a microphone. I find that fascinating. I don't know why.
I do too.
Because why does that? You couldn't get him to say it in a way that makes sense without your question.
It feels like it has to be due to some sort of spontaneity where the question just came out of, and the filmmaker thought that it was a question that needed to be asked, but it wasn't one that was planned. Like, that's how it feels to me. And so, like, I feel like you a lot of times get the, like, interesting answers to the off-camera questions, you know?
I almost feel like a documentary like this, because it really was just a conversation. It was all in one room. I wonder how long they had him for. Because he was wearing the same thing and in the same room the whole time. Yep. That doesn't mean that they only filmed it in one day, but I would be curious how long he was talking. But I almost feel like this format would work better if you could hear the questions. Because without hearing the questions, it seems like he is just thinking all these things and saying them. Mm-hmm. I want to know how much he was being prodded and how the questions were phrased. There are, like... I don't think that this is a documentary where I think I'm being manipulated or something, but like just generally, I think it's better if you can hear the tone that the interviewer is taking with the subject, because it gives you a context for why they're answering the way that they are.
Okay, I can see that.
If this documentarian was sucking off Friedkin the whole time and talking about what a genius he is or whatever, that influences how I feel about how Friedkin is answering.
Okay.
In a subtle way. It doesn't matter that much. I hadn't really thought about that.
Because, like, I kind of like when it doesn't feel like you're watching a 60 Minutes interview. Because I feel like if the documentarian is there sitting in a chair opposite William Friedkin, it starts to feel like that very quickly.
That's what I mean. My favorite format for an interview like this, where the camera is just on the subject the whole time, is I like it when you can, not every time, but pretty regularly, hear them unmiked and there's a subtitle for them saying something to the person. Okay. Because I think that I guess it does come back to that original question of like, I think I have been on episodes where we talked about this before, about as a documentary filmmaker, like, what is your place? Mm-hmm. I think it does come back to that, because I don't think you can make a documentary without influencing the subject of it. And I think that to completely remove your voice from it is pretending as if William Friedkin just sat in a room and said those things. Yeah. But he wouldn't have said those things if you weren't sitting there asking him. Yeah. So I'd like to hear how you asked him.
I guess that's fair. It's like, I can see how you wouldn't think it was necessary here, because there's nothing gotcha about this. Like, this documentary is not here to expose anything that Friedkin has said or done in the relationship to this movie. So you can make a leap of, well,
a leap of faith.
We're just a little bit of a leap of faith, that's where the title of the movie came from, because they're asking you to make this very leap. That basically they're not questions, it's just prompts of like, what about the score? What visually inspired you? Like, you know, but you can't do that because everything is related, and you can't like take all context out of everything. It's like, so there is a lack of objectivity to the whole process if the questions are off screen, or like not heard. But I
also think it would probably have made the documentary a lot longer, though. Yeah. And I do think this is a nice, tight little video essay, basically. Yeah. Like that's more what it feels like, except you get actual in-depth answers from the director about it. Yeah. Which is like, I wish I had something like this for every movie that I love.
I feel like we're two people that should watch way more bonus features than we do, you know, because I love hearing stories about the production of movies and, you know, directors bloviating on every choice they ever made.
So much of the time I got out of watching featurettes and stuff on DVDs because honestly, most of the time on the tin, it seems to be advertising that you're actually going to get insights. Mm-hmm. Very rarely is it actual insights. Most of the time, a special feature on a fucking Blu-ray is just, and on this day, it was raining. You know what I mean? Like, it's such stuff where I'm like, yes, when I'm obsessed with a thing, I like to know stuff like that. But like, I think all the time about when I got the Stella DVDs, I listened to the commentary on the episodes because it was the three of them. And so this is Michael Ian Black, Michael Showalter, and David Wayne. Every single fucking commentary. If you own the Stella DVDs and you've never listened to these commentaries, you can pull any one of them. And I guarantee you this is true. Every episode, shooting this sucked. This was a miserable day. It rained all day. It was awful. I remember you had a rock in your shoe and we couldn't stop to get it out. Like it's stuff like that. These little complaints. And they all sound so tired and so unhappy. And there's no fun facts.
Yeah.
You don't learn anything.
And it's not fun in the way that like Ben Affleck Armageddon commentary is.
No, it's just you feel
miserable.
bad that you enjoy this thing that clearly was the worst 2 years of their lives.
Yeah.
Was writing it.
This
and
thing you
filming
loved
it.
was torture for the people who made it.
Yeah. I feel that way sometimes, even when you hear the Mystery Science Theater guys talk about it sometimes. Like Frank Conniff will be like, honestly, you guys, it's torture that I have to watch these movies as many times as I do. And I've heard Frank Conniff talk about Manos and how many times in his life he's watched Manos Hands of Fate. And it makes me feel bad for enjoying Mystery Science Theater. I sometimes am like, but you did put it out as a product you wanted me to consume, right?
You have riffed on this movie professionally multiple times. So if you hated it so much, why'd you do it the third time, you know?
Yeah.
But I get it. Like art and commerce, it'll tear you apart.
Yeah. But really, most of the time, featurettes like that are just boring.
Yeah.
It's not even that they make me feel bad all the time. The Stella one is just the one I think of constantly because I thought it was going to be fun.
Yeah,
to
you
listen
thought,
to commentary.
these comedians are going to talk about the goofy show they made.
But really, they're mostly just kind of boring. You know what was a really good special feature?
What's that?
The Guillermo del Toro Pinocchio 30-minute little featurette that Netflix did about the stop motion. I think that I don't think I've ever been disappointed by a featurette about stop motion animation.
No.
That's always fucking interesting. Stop motion is such a fascinating art form, and it's so cool to see people walking around the set. No matter what movie it is or why.
You can do that thing where you speed up a bunch of the like people maneuvering the puppets and make a like a
I'd watch a whole movie of that.
Yeah.
It's fascinating every time.
Yep.
I've watched so many Coraline special features. That Pinocchio, I watched a bunch of special features about it, even outside of that. I sought out clips of James and the Giant Peach. I used to watch clips of. I love Nightmare Before Christmas. It's fascinating to me because it is. I have heard multiple stop motion artists say that you have to be kind of crazy to do it because it's so hard mentally.
And you're doing so much to do so little.
Yes.
Like, yeah.
It can take months to do a 3-second shot.
Yeah.
Months of your life of working full time.
So, yeah, I like stop motion's absolutely absurd. And I respect the hell out of anyone who does it on even the smallest scale.
Braver than the troops.
Yep. But William Friedkin talks a lot about, I want to just start with basically the thing he says at the beginning here, which because I feel like this sums up a lot of his ethos on film in general, is that like everything has to do with the mystery of fate or the mystery of faith. And The Exorcist is about faith. And it's like, there are certain directors that once you hear them talk about things, you can just tell what drives them and like what their like big thing they're trying to deal with and grapple with is when they're making movies. And it like Friedkin just comes out and just like says it, you know, I've been working on this story for 6 months and he just tweeted it,
and
you know,
he just tweeted it out.
Now, Friedkin is probably the kind of person that has said everything he says in this documentary over and over to anyone who will listen for 30 years. But I haven't heard a lot of this before, so it was very interesting to me.
I think the most interesting thing to me was the very last thing he said. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Should we do that since you just said that?
Let's bookend it.
Because I think that it goes back into, like you're saying, fate or faith, and the fact that seems to be how his mind works. And that, honestly, if you've seen the movie The Exorcist, the fact that The Exorcist is his take on faith is very interesting.
Yeah.
But at the end, he talks about going and sitting in a Zen garden.
Yes.
This was my favorite part of the whole fucking thing.
This honestly, and like the stuff that's tied to it, when he talks about grace notes, this is a thing that I talk about in movies all the time. And also like, you know, life, like I was just, what's funny is I was just talking about trying to describe the setup for the movie Starman to you. And the way, and like,
if you had the phrase grace notes, you probably would have used
Starman
that.
literally is about an alien learning humanity by watching your home movies of the grace notes with your ex-husband.
Yeah. Do you want to explain what a grace note is? I had never heard this phrase.
I had neither. I know about it in music, but which is kind of their transition using it here about movies. What is it in music? In music, a grace note is a very faint, quick note that happens right before the note you're playing. So it'll be like, da-da, and it almost comes off as one note.
Okay.
So it's these little things that just add just that little bit into things. It's used in jazz a lot.
Used as a phrase for what Friedkin is using it for. That's
it's perfect.
It's
perfect. So he talks about grace notes as these little things he's talking about in movies. So these little things in movies where the scene is not doing anything to progress the plot of the movie forward, but it is taking time to show you the characters doing either mundane things or things that don't seem important to what the movie is. And he specifically talks about the scene in The Exorcist where the mom of Reagan, is walking down the street and she passes by some kids in Halloween costumes that are out trick-or-treating, and then two nuns whose habits fly up in the wind and kind of get caught by the wind. And he talks about how it's like one of his favorite scenes in the movie, and it's just this little grace note. The plot doesn't move forward even an inch, but the kids trick-or-treating is kind of you can look at it as like the seeding of the idea of hidden things inside the children, and like it metaphorically can implant some things into your brain, but it isn't intended to. Like it is just a moment that is supposed to let you live with this character going about the events of the movie.
He also used it, like, I think that he used grace notes as a very broad definition of moments in movies, like you're saying, that don't forward the plot, but some that are like, it's not integral to the plot, but it is the moment that you will remember later on when you think about the movie.
Yep.
And like, at times he used it specifically to describe moments early in a film that are just pleasant, that allow you to get to know the characters better, but they're just small little things. Because he talks about it. He used grace note, I think, to describe the mom and daughter playing together in the movie too.
Yeah.
And I think stuff like that, it like that really resonated with me when he said that, because I was like, yeah, like I like having a word for a thing like that I've always said. Isn't it weird? I just keep thinking about this one part of this movie, but it isn't significant. But yet it's the thing that lingers in my mind. And now I'm going to call that a grace note for the rest of my goddamn life.
Yeah. So if nothing else, this documentary gave us that, which is a great term for a concept that I've thought about a lot over the years.
How many times in your life have you had a guy, I'm going to say a man specifically, because I think just generally there are less women who do this thing that I'm about to describe, but there are probably a lot of really cool women who you could say it about too. But I'm going to ask about men. I'm gendering it. Where he loves to talk at length about his own stuff, and you actively seek out and listen to him talk about his own stuff. Do you have guys like that? I have always had men like this in my life who I love to listen to long form interviews about them talking about their own art. And I think that it takes a very particular kind of person, and especially in art, a particular kind of artist, to be able to do that. And they're mostly men.
Yeah.
is why I said that.
I don't think there has been a person specifically that I return to all the time for that. But I generally like to consume documentaries and autobiographies and things that are people talking about their work, you know?
This was the kind of thing where I was like, I think I could probably watch like 25 hours straight of William Friedkin just talking about his own fucking movies.
Yeah, probably.
And he probably has done that. So I could go look it up if I want to.
I would watch a 3 times longer version of this about Sorcerer.
Mm-hmm.
Or French Connection,
any of his
Exorcist,
movies. Any of them.
Yeah.
But like, actually, as I was saying it and I was gendering it, I will say, in a way that I find really pleasant, Greta Gerwig does this about her own work.
Oh, yeah?
She will go on at length about like, and here's why I did that, and here's why I was thinking this, and here's what I think about filmmaking.
I did read a whole thing about why she added the like monologue for Florence Pugh in Little Women that I really liked, where she talks about how, you know,
about being
basically.
Marriage is an economic proposition.
Yeah.
Why?
Because she was just basically like, it was effectively, the justification was, it's a thing that I think should have been said in this scene originally, and if I'm making my version of this movie, it's necessary here. And like for the read of the book that she had, it felt.
And that's sort of what I mean is like, yeah. I don't, how many women can you think of that you have seen them not only be in a position where they're being interviewed and asked a question like that, but that they will just frankly say, and here's my take on it as an artist and why I do it the way that I do it.
Like, I think that, because
people ask that of men a lot more.
Because in this documentary itself, like one of the things that he starts off talking about is how, you know, he was working basically on id for a lot of this movie. He was making decisions on casting, on shot choice, on changes to stuff that was just operating on instinct. And he trusted his instincts, and he just made it. It was a quote from Fritz Lang where he said he was, sleepwalking security.
The security of a sleepwalker, yeah. I loved that. I went apeshit.
Where you just are trusting your instincts implicitly and you don't question yourself and you just know that what you are doing is the right choice. And that is the thing that I don't think you get afforded in Hollywood anymore. And the fact that we don't get as many Exorcists made these days maybe means we should, but
I know. I mean, here's the argument though. Yeah. Like let's get into that. I think that's a very interesting thing.
Yeah.
But William Friedkin also punched a guy.
True.
To get a reaction out of him.
Yeah.
And that's the security of a sleepwalker.
Fired a gun on set multiple times.
Yeah. Without telling the actors he was going to do it. So like there is stuff like that. And he openly says, when he says the guy wouldn't cry. He wasn't an actor. He was that's the guy who was an actual priest, right? There are a couple guys who are actual priests in this movie. And he needed to cry and he couldn't do it on his own. And William Friedkin pulled him aside and smacked him. Just fucking smacked him in the face. And he went and did it, and he cries. He cries in the movie.
Yeah.
And he says that afterwards, the guy said, thank you. I never would have done it without you doing that. And I think that there is something to be said for the fact that if you create the right kind of environment where everyone trusts each other, you can do stuff like that. I think that there is something to be said for the fact that it becomes abuse when the environment is abusive.
Yes.
I think that it is possible to do things to shock actors as a director and to do weird things on set to get reactions. Mm-hmm. I don't think that is like always you're a bad person for doing it. But I think that too often the people who do shit like that are also fucking tyrants who treat you like shit the whole time in between takes too.
Yeah.
And like, cause like, I mean, we talk about Kubrick a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I think anybody who watches a lot of movies does. It's just one of those topics where everybody's like, yeah, but Kubrick was a monster and he made everybody do 99 takes on every single thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I see people often bring up specifically Shelley Duvall as being like, that's proof that what Kubrick did isn't worth it because just look at what happened to Shelley Duvall. But my thing on that is Shelley Duvall never says anything bad about Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah.
When you ask her, she's like, I'm really good in that movie.
And I think there's,
you know what I mean?
There was like a quote taken out of context that got passed around on the internet early on that kind of fostered that whole thing.
Yeah, because she said he was difficult.
Yeah, and
basically.
people didn't add the part where she said that it was a difficult process.
She has said it was like one of the worst times of her life. She was having a really bad time. Stanley wasn't sympathetic to her at all. But the next part is always, she says, I would never take it back. I would never change the fact that I did it. And it's a great movie. And he was a genius.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that to justify it. He shouldn't have treated her that way. I do feel that way. But I think that there is like, that's why you can't have conversations about stuff like this and just say, it's always this way or it's always that way.
Yeah.
Because there's gray areas with all of this kind of stuff. And when you say, like, I think it's interesting you saying, like, directors aren't really afforded the security of a sleepwalker in the same way.
Yeah.
And that's why we don't get as many exorcists anymore. I think that that's true.
From I'm talking purely at the top.
Yeah.
You get stuff in indie directions and even in like the big indies like A24, you can get some stuff like that. But
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think generally you're right. And like there's a reason why this time in the 70s is known as being like one of the greatest times in cinema, is because a bunch of guys were coming up with William Friedkin who were really pioneering. And
cinema was auteur driven, and
yes.
you got
they were doing stuff like this.
So
Scorsese and Spielberg and all of these guys were fucking it up.
Like there's specifically a scene that he talks about where it's like a quiet moment and a phone rings and everybody jumps and it just plays that scene, and then he goes, yeah, I didn't ring a phone, I shot a rifle.
Yep.
And it's like, oh, now I'm going to think about that every time I watch this movie.
The way that Jason Miller jumps when that phone rings, I have always thought was so great. And Jason is so naturalistic in this movie. I love Jason Miller. I love The Exorcist. I love his performance in particular. And I think it is really interesting because like he is so naturalistic throughout the whole rest of the movie.
Yeah.
And that reaction is he seems so genuinely shaken. And it's because someone just shot a gun right off camera.
Yeah.
Pretty cool, like, Will.
Yeah. The other thing that I thought was really interesting about this, look, the whole thing is interesting. I should say that differently. But another thing I really liked out of this was towards the end when he was talking about the finale of the movie and how he literally has William Pleater. He has the book there where he's like has the notes to show. Basically, he says that William Peter Blatty wrote around having to put something in writing in his book at the end of the movie, which is what is the exact mechanism under which Karras throws himself out the window, because you know that he ends up downstairs dead, but you never get the actual description of the thought process making that decision. And that it is the one thing that Friedkin says is a flaw in The Exorcist to this day, and he still doesn't understand.
And that it is a choice that he made. He put it in the movie this way, and he still doesn't understand it.
Yeah.
And this was recorded a couple years ago, and he still is saying, I don't understand it. I can't make heads or tails of it, which is so interesting because you would think after 40 years, you would have come up with some explanation, even if it's just the one you tell yourself.
Yeah.
But the way that he is just so openly like, I don't understand this and I never will, is really interesting to me.
Yeah.
It's like that's another thing where like how many like auteurs on his level do you hear just say that about their own work? I don't really understand why I did that. Why did I do that? He
literally says at some point I just filmed what was on the page and I didn't question it and I put it in the movie and there you go.
And the thing that he's talking about is Father Karras. If you haven't seen The Exorcist, go and pause this and go watch that because we're going to continue spoiling The Exorcist.
Yes.
But Father Karras, the other priest whose name I don't even remember, I haven't seen this movie in a while, Max von Sydow was already dead.
Yes.
And they're the only two in the room with the little girl who's possessed. And Father Karras starts to beat her up and shake her. The Exorcist is so... The stuff like that where he's just beating the shit out of this child is so viscerally upsetting and scary and unnerving. And he's just beating the shit out of this child.
I remember listening to a thing where John Carpenter was describing making Assault on Precinct 13.
Yeah.
And
that's another one that's very unnerving.
For those that don't know, there is an infamous scene in Assault on Precinct 13 where someone is driving an ice cream truck and a little girl goes up to do it, and the person driving the ice cream truck just shoots her dead. And it is shown. It is that like
she's so little.
It is brutal, and it is one of the more brutal things that
And her dad finds her body. Yes. It's like really brutal. It's really brutal.
And he talks about it, and it's just
that's like the opening of the movie.
He was trying.
That's like the beginning.
It was specifically like trying to. He wanted you to feel like you were in like hell. Like he wanted you to feel like nothing is safe. Everything could happen. This movie is going to hurt, and that was like the most quick way to set the tone needed for the rest of the movie to work. And it's like the fucking ripping the Band-Aid off in terms of setting the pace. And it's similar with this movie where it's just like these things are happening to an actual, are being made to look like they're happening to a 12-year-old girl.
And all of the stuff that this kid goes through, it's so upsetting. I actually am really curious. We haven't even brought up the fact that the guys who redid Halloween are redoing The Exorcist.
Yes.
And I don't think that there's any way that they get on the level of how unnerving this first Exorcist movie is.
No.
I think it's almost impossible. With Michael Myers, it's a lot easier to capture the oof of what is scary about that guy.
Yeah.
Because guess what? He's a 7-foot tall, broad-shouldered, like very big built dude in a fucking creepy mask, and he has a knife that is as big as your forearm.
Yeah.
That's scary.
Yeah.
Like that's scary, and it's scary pretty much no matter what situation you put him in. Even the less good Halloween movies, he still is pretty scary. Like that's how I feel about Michael Myers.
That's fair.
And so I think and I'm not saying the movies are scary. I'm saying he still is a scary figure. I don't think that I've ever seen anybody take the wind out of the sails of Michael Myers.
The closest it's come to me is the first Rob Zombie movie.
See, I've never seen that one. I've never even seen clips of it.
He's just standing around in like every shot, and it loses impact very quickly.
I think I would still be scared of him.
That's fair.
But that he is like my guy in terms of being scared.
That is specific to you. So.
Living in our old apartment where all of the closets had the slats the way they do in the Halloween movies was hell to me.
Yeah.
That was hell. But what was my original point I was making? Oh, they're remaking The Exorcist and it won't be as unnerving. They have 2 girls. Do you think that they're trying to cheat code it? What if it's 2 kids? It would be even more upsetting. Imagine that happening to 1 child. Yeah. Now imagine it happening to 2 of them.
I was imagining the like James Cameron thing of walking up and just putting a $sign after alien and making aliens.
Possessed girl.
And
possessed
I was like,
girls.
But then I was like, oh, exorcists. That doesn't work as well because you have to. Then it's multiple exorcists doing.
And there already are 2 exorcists in. I think all the Exorcist movies, aren't there? Don't you need 2 priests?
Not in some of the later ones. But
really?
Yeah.
For some reason, I thought when I picture a poster, even for the sequels, there's 2 priests.
We'll watch Exorcist 3 soon. I don't think there's 2 priests in that one.
There's not 2 and 3?
No, I don't believe so.
I'm picturing the guys though, isn't it? It's George C. Scott is in that one, and there's another guy. Is he not a priest? You don't want to spoil Exorcist 3 for me.
We'll get into it. I might be misremembering, but
I'm looking forward to George C. Scott. I love George C. Scott. I don't think I've ever disliked a George C. Scott movie.
No.
I started like 3 points.
Yeah. Well,
I didn't finish.
I've been waiting for a good time to bring us back around to the Zen Garden. And that was like 20 minutes ago.
I said that. I've been thinking. I said that at the beginning that the Zen Garden was my favorite part.
Let's take a moment to compose ourselves and go to the Zen Garden.
Okay.
Because much like William Friedkin, I have been to a Zen Garden. I went to the one in Portland, and it fucking rules. There is like a real calm that happens when you just sit in a quiet place like that, where it's very intentionally manicured and laid out and everything. I didn't have the exact existential process that Friedkin did.
Did you have a realization? about life or anything like that?
Not really. There was a quieting of the mind that came with just like looking and just focusing on the intentionality of the space that I was in and the like upkeep and really just the aesthetics. Like I think a lot about this is maybe a little dicey because it's the guy sucks, but I read the Enders series a lot as a kid.
We're talking a lot about guys that suck, and I just defended Stanley Kubrick, so go ahead.
And there's a plot in one of the later books where this person is in a specific religion that's made up for this book, and as an attempt to be the most pious person in that religion, she like gets on her hands and knees and traces every line on a wooden floor. And that is her like ritual for maintaining piousness, and it overtakes her life and like fucks everything up. But the intentionality of like that level of granular thing, there's a calming to that, which like even when I read those books and saw it as a punishment, my brain was just kind of like, I mean, for a while that would be kind of nice though. And it was one of the first times I ever had to like really like jarring dissonance with a novel, you know, where like the thing that this is supposed to be like a horrifying thing, and I'm just like, yeah, but for like an afternoon.
How did you feel about the part in The Master where he keeps making him walk back and forth?
See, that doesn't work as well for me.
I was obsessed with that scene though.
Yeah, it's a really good scene, but I would hate it. I would be so frustrated by that.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I find it so interesting conceptually, this idea though that you could do it enough times that it would become part of you.
Yeah.
Anything like that is really interesting to me because it's just like, I think there is this malleability of the human mind that is kind of undeniable.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a person that a relaxing thing for me growing up, once I like had and started getting into collecting music, was basically organizing and collecting all of my stuff into like neat folders and like making everything go in the right place. So
I follow a woman on TikTok who, when she was little, she used to go to her grandparents' house and they had the size a size that would fit on top of a dresser.
Mm-hmm.
These drawers. It's like however many, 2 feet by 3 feet or something, but the drawers are like 2 inches wide.
Okay.
And it was just a bunch of little drawers, and they were all filled with little trinkets.
Mm-hmm.
And she used to, every time she would visit her grandparents, it was her favorite thing to do, to dump out all of the drawers and then organize the trinkets alphabetically. So what letter the thing started with, she would put in each drawer. And her grandparents were freaked out by it. They did not like that she did this. And the video was just her saying, I realized I could just do that. And she bought herself new drawers and little trinkets. And she was like, now every day, if I want to, I can just dump out all my little trinkets, which I think is so great. But that's the thing is like, I also love shit like that. And some people would think that was a punishment.
Yeah.
If you made them do that, that would be the worst day of their fucking lives. And you and I would be like, ooh, alphabetizing the trinkets? Yeah.
Anyway, so the Zen garden thing, I kind of get it. So his whole thing with the Zen garden was, it was like the Japanese release, which was like a couple years later or something. He was going to see some Japanese premiere for The Exorcist and ended up in this Zen garden. And he says he eventually comes to the realization that the rocks basically mean that we're in this world alone and will never connect with each other.
If you've never seen a Zen garden, it's a garden of just combed sand that often has rocks in it. And you might have seen like the kind that's like a desk toy that they sell in America. I feel like that's that you have. That's the most common one that you probably would have interacted with if you're not literally a Buddhist or interested in that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But he was saying that the rocks will never touch.
Yeah.
And he started crying thinking about how the rocks will never touch and that's people. Yeah. That we all are also separate and can never touch. And I was like, the fact that like he was skeptical going to the Zen garden. He didn't go with the intention of having an existential realization.
He literally said, I sat down and I looked at it and said, what's the attraction?
Yes. But to be that skeptical, but also that open and receptive to thinking about, you know what I mean? Like that's such an interesting dynamic where I don't know if I would ever be able to strike that kind of balance in myself of like remaining skeptical, but being open enough to an experience like that I would start crying at the idea of rocks not touching each other.
Yeah.
Like I was obsessed with him saying that, but also I thought I sort of feel that way. I feel that way about life. I think that like a thing that I come back to again and again in terms of if we're talking existential realizations is this idea that no, I don't think any two people have ever actually fully understood each other in the history of humanity.
Yeah.
I think it is impossible for me to have a thought and to communicate that thought and for you to receive it and have it be in the same form it was when I made it in my head. I don't think anyone can do that. I think it's impossible.
I think, like there's limitations to language and it doesn't make a one-to-one of brain-to-brain
It's also
contact.
not even just language, though. It's also your brain interprets information differently than mine does. You have different feelings about things than I do. If I said that it's good to dump out trinkets and alphabetize them, there are people who just couldn't even fathom the idea of that being good. You know what I mean? Like, and I can't account for that in everything I say.
Yeah.
There are people listening to this podcast who are actively misunderstanding everything I'm saying right now. And I have no control over that. Yep. I can't do anything about that. And that's just how it is. And they think they understand me. And they might not. They might be pretty close. I think that like the closest we come to fully understanding each other is like 89%. You know what I mean? Like I really think that there's a gap. But so when he said that, I was like, I feel that way. Looking at the rocks, I also feel that way. I think that we are all rocks in a Zen garden and the sand is immaculately combed and we will never cross it to touch.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really disagree.
How does that make you feel that we're dating? You feel good?
I feel fine. Yeah. I think that a relationship is based on noticeable attempt at attempting to understand.
Yeah. I think that that's the most everyone can strive for. I think we should. I don't think that means we shouldn't try to understand each other.
Yeah.
We should all try to understand each other.
But it's a process, not a reasonable thing to actually accomplish.
And we should be aware that not only are other people not understanding us, but that we're never fully understanding other people.
Is this the moment that this podcast jumps the shark and goes into a relationship advice questions podcast?
Let's do it.
Because I feel like this is a funny thing that I used to listen to because I got into podcasts through listening to like my brother and me and stuff like that, which is very like people send in questions. Why is it just implicit that if you're listening to a podcast and they ask if anyone has any questions, people just send in relationship advice questions?
It's always relationship advice.
Why do you think these people, these random fuckers who just happen to have a microphone and a Libsyn account, have any actual advice for you in your relationships?
Here's why, though. Here's why. Because no one understands each other. And if I say to you, what do you need advice about in your life right now? Mm-hmm. I guarantee you it's about a misunderstanding or a miscommunication between you and another human being.
Yeah.
And what's the most common form of that comes up? Either work or dating.
Yeah.
That's where miscommunication happens. That's where misunderstanding happens. And that's why we need advice.
Yeah. Now, that doesn't fully answer the question of why they would ask some Yahoo from fucking, because
they want to hear their name read on a podcast. They want the guy to say their name.
Yeah. So, I would love it if William Friedkin said my name. That'd be great.
That's the dream. I wrestled Kurt Angle on that SmackDown. And he said to me, you get one roll up. And I thought, well, shit, I've got it made.
Oh, man.
I keep thinking about him saying that.
If anyone emails itgetsweirdpodcast@gmail.com with what that quote is from, we'll figure something out.
I'll pay you $5. I'll say it. And there's no time limit on that. I'm not going to give any other hint as to what it is.
Yeah.
If you know what that is from and you email Niall, I will PayPal you $5. You have to have a PayPal.
Okay. Okay, let's just quickly get over some of the other stuff that's covered in this documentary before we reach the end of this, because I think it's interesting to bring up the things that he chooses to talk about in this movie. Because other than switching out one of his main actors by just going with his gut by bringing in Jason Miller.
That's wild, by the way. Don't you love Stacy Keach? They had Stacy Keach cast.
Yeah.
And Jason Miller was
had to pay him in full.
Yes. And Jason Miller was like, no, that's me. And asked for a screen test. And Friedkin was like, no.
He literally said the line, one of the hardest lines in this entire documentary was him saying, okay, we'll film it. I'll take the film out of the camera, hand it to you, and you can show it to your grandchildren.
I laughed out loud. I was like, what a brutal fucking thing to say to someone. Yeah. But then it was so good that he got it. Can you imagine? You go into a screen test and that's the attitude of the guy filming you, and you still kill it?
Yeah.
You knock it out of the fucking park? That's because you're Jason fucking Miller.
And you're dealing with someone who's at least slightly unhinged in William Friedkin.
Like, so fucking sick. It's unbelievable.
These people that are the like auteur personality that is just, I need to have total control over everything at all times, is fascinating to me. I know that it's toxic and these people shouldn't be like glorified for those things, but man, the stories are interesting. Yeah. You know? But okay. He talks about making the score for it and how, you know, he went through a longtime collaborator who had some ideas for score for it, and he straight up just like took it away from the guy because he thought he hated what he was going to do with like a big church organ. He thought that would ruin the movie, and he straight up has not talked to that man since. And then he went and traveled overseas to talk to Bernard Herrmann, who wanted to do... No, he was the one that wanted to do the
Bernard
organ.
Herrmann wanted to use a church organ.
The other guy was just going to make a big, brash, loud score that he didn't like. But yeah, then Bernard Herrmann wanted to use a giant pipe organ for the score, and Friedkin just like said... no, thank you, and left.
He said, but like what I love about it is he said it was a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah,
like that the way he said it was like, I said to him, I'm glad that I got to meet you because I admire your work, but no, I'm not fucking doing that, which is really funny. And that the way that he says, I think this guy is a genius. I think he might be the greatest film composer of all time, and I think that it was so obvious and rudimentary, this idea of using a church organ, like how willing he is to just bury the guy, of like, I think he's a fucking genius, but that was it stunk like shit. That
and he
idea.
Also, the guy wanted Bernard Herrmann also wanted to cut out the intro, the first scene in the movie, which is a big thing for Friedkin. He fought for that to be in,
because Blatty wanted to cut that too, the part in Iraq, which like this is my thing that I kept coming back to again and again, was every time he talked about Blatty and the stuff Blatty wanted in the movie. You can't trust people to adapt their own work. How many times in the history of the world has it worked out to let someone adapt their own work into another art form? It's very difficult to do. And I think most people can't be trusted to edit appropriately. Yeah. And Blatty wanted to cut the part in Iraq. That's crazy, because that is so essential. It's essential.
Yes. It sets up everything. It's required for the rest of the movie.
The idea of cutting it is so wild to me.
When he first brought that up, you like gasped.
It's wacky. Why would anyone cut that? It sets the whole thing. You wouldn't have Uncut Gems today.
I know. I was thinking about Uncut Gems throughout a lot of that. Ugh. We're going to rewatch The Exorcist soon. It's going to be great.
Yeah. Exorcist is a perfect movie. If you're listening to this and you haven't watched The Exorcist, come on.
Yeah, what are you doing?
Come on. Watch The Exorcist.
Yeah.
You can watch the 73 version, you can watch the 2000 version. They're both good.
Yeah, they're both fantastic.
They're both good. Whatever's easier to find, whatever you can fucking pirate online.
I think it's on at least one, if not two different streamings. I think it's on like Max and also Shudder, so
hell yeah, dude.
Go hog wild if you haven't seen it.
Get in there.
Oh, the other thing that we haven't talked about, the recording of the voice actress for Reagan.
That's insane.
This is the most unhinged, morally questionable thing of the entire production, and that's including punching the guy and shooting a gun randomly to get people to react on take. So, there is an actress named Mercedes McCambridge, who Friedkin remembered from some like westerns and stuff that he saw growing up. or not growing up because she was still alive. And
he wanted her specifically because he felt she had an androgynous voice, basically.
Yeah, because he was having trouble getting the Pazuzu voice into something that he liked, and didn't want it to sound like a man or a woman. Kind of that whole thing of like trying to make it unnatural. He knew a
man who he was asking to work on it, and it always sounded like a man, and he didn't want it to sound like a man.
So this is a woman who was I think like semi-retired or something. I don't know. She was she ended up doing this job, but the way that she did it and what was required for her to do this is absolutely wild. So
I'd love to hear her version of this, by the way, because he says she asked to do it this way.
Yes.
And I would be really curious to hear, like, truly did she just walk into a room and go, yes, I'll do it. I want to do it. And I'm going to break my sobriety in order to do it.
Yeah.
Like, because that's wild.
So, yeah, she had been sober after a bout of alcoholism and everything. Like, she has... Look, yeah.
You know, sometimes you just come down with alcoholism.
She was an alcoholic who had been sober for a while.
I had that 24-hour alcoholism bug that's going around.
So, she
was an alcoholic, and when he asked her to do this part, he showed her a rough cut of the movie, and she said, if I'm going to do it, I know what I have to do to get my voice to the place where you want it. I'm going to have to eat raw eggs, drink whiskey, and smoke cigarettes, which smoking and drinking are both things that she had quit.
Yes.
And she tied herself to a chair in an uncomfortable position intentionally to cause herself pain.
Mm-hmm. Brought in 2 priests.
And had to bring in 2 priests who she consulted with between takes, basically.
And like comforted her as she was saying all this crazy shit.
In order for her to live through it. Like, why? But here's the thing. Here's my thing. I would absolutely volunteer to put myself through that kind of a thing if you showed me a rough cut of The Exorcist. Because The Exorcist is one of the greatest fucking movies ever made. And if somebody showed me a rough cut of it and said, I want you to be part of this, I would be like, how much do I have to suffer?
Yeah.
Because I'll do it.
Because like he points out these like guttural noises that they recorded of her that were used in the movie, where he likens it to saxophone overtones, where what he describes is overtones. But he's talking about how like when a saxophonist hits this note and it also sounds like other notes, and what that's called is a multiphonic. And when you go and listen to the sounds that he's describing, her voice straight up does multiphonics. Like this is a thing
that's crazy, right?
Yeah, it's like that's a thing that you get in like Tuvan throat singing and in some like experimental choir stuff. But it's not something that is like a commonplace thing for people to be able to do and know how to get it out of themselves.
It's really interesting.
Maybe professional singers will disagree with me and that, but like from my knowledge of being around but not actually a singer,
you have enough knowledge to know about this. You're a musician.
But like it's a thing that like I learned how to do on certain ways, like on certain notes on saxophone. And so him citing that specifically was like, oh, I know exactly what he's talking about.
Yeah.
And she does it. It's absolutely wild. He also talks about some like painters that inspire him. It's really interesting seeing he straight up like cites a specific shot that he will go to for like how he does close-ups and how that's related. Actually, I don't know why I'm going through this. I have my notes here. Caravaggio is his like figure.
Are you familiar with Caravaggio?
I have seen their paintings, but I don't know like a lot about them.
Judith beheading Holofernes is one of my favorite paintings, specifically the Caravaggio version. Mm-hmm. And they showed that painting multiple times in this documentary.
Yeah.
And he kept talking about it as a source of inspiration. And I was like, it was literally like Leo pointing at the TV.
Yeah.
I was like, I like that painting too, William Friedkin. How cool am I?
Yeah. He talks about like...
Not that Caravaggio is like a deep cut or something, but I do enjoy his work.
That iconic shot of the priest showing up under the street lamp and everything. He was inspired by a Magritte painting, which is where he finds the surrealist touches, which I think is funny because one of the things he talks about is how he struggles to convey surrealism in his work. He's a literalist. He's a realist. He's like he's into realism.
Yeah.
And so he like basically cribs from surrealist painters to try to add those things into his movies.
During that part, they showed a part of Sorcerer, which is highly surreal.
Yes.
How do you feel about that part of Sorcerer?
I think it rules.
Is it like your favorite part though? I could see you being like, that is the thing.
Is it the riot thing that you're talking about? I forget which clip of Sorcerer played at which part.
The blue part where Shudder is on his own.
Oh yeah,
where it's all blue.
Yeah, I feel
like that's a very you part of that movie.
It is the culmination of the toll that it takes on him.
Yep.
And it is I literally said while watching this documentary, I turned to Jules and said, "You have to keep me from just talking about Sorcerer the entire time on the podcast." And so far, I haven't been. But Sorcerer is like one of my all-time favorite movies, and I think it is.
Well, put it in your Letterboxd top 4 then, why don't you?
I probably should. I haven't reassessed the top 4 in a while.
What is your top 4? Read it right now.
Let me look up. All right. So my top 4 on Letterboxd are RoboCop, Stalker, Popstar Never Stop Never Stopping, and The Thing.
That's very you.
Yeah.
I used to have Walk Hard in my top 4, which I feel like is very similar to having Popstar in your top 4.
Yeah.
It's not in my top 4.
It might.
I change my top 4 more than you do.
Yeah, like 2 or 3 of those have stayed the same since I started my Letterboxd account. So I'm probably due for a re-roll of those. But yeah, I love, so like this real.
I think Sorcerer could make it in there.
I think it could. It could probably bump Stalker, but Stalker like is incredible. Anyway, so he talks about Rembrandts for close-ups and face shots, Vermeer for landscapes and wide shots.
Vermeer too. Ugh.
Yeah.
These are all the painters that were like my favorite painters before I dropped out of college.
Yeah, I like a lot of these painters as well. I never have been like a person that really like contemplates paintings a lot. I appreciate them when I'm at a museum.
Have you ever seen a Vermeer in person?
Maybe
in person. That particularly, like, I think that there are some paintings that just, it comes across so much more in person, where you can see the brush strokes or lack thereof, or the size of it, or the whatever. There's a lot of stuff like that, but I forget the name of it now. I think it's a Vermeer. The woman pouring the milk.
Oh yeah. Okay. I know which one you're talking about. Yeah.
That painting fucking blows me away. Anyway.
Yeah. I was going to say, when you said seeing it play, I was like, yeah, don't you know the Mona Lisa is like really small?
It's small. So is Starry Night. It's called Starry Night?
Yeah. I think so.
Smaller than you think.
So yeah, like he talks a lot about influences and stuff like that in a way that I find really interesting, because I think, like, especially, I've never seen someone do that before, where they literally just like talk about paintings and relations to how they deal with different shot types. That's the first time I've ever seen a director straight up just do that. And you can literally put them side by side and you're like, oh, I get it. I get what he is pulling from here and how it impacts his style. It's fucking fascinating. I think there's one last thing that I wanted to talk about in regards to this movie, because I think it's a very interesting point of view for looking at this movie and making art in general, along with like kind of how I process things when I'm doing research for this podcast. William Friedkin talks about he couldn't have made the movie he made if he approached it as a skeptic, if he approached it as someone who doesn't believe in exorcism or in paranormal stuff being real. He had to at least be open to the idea of belief to be able to grapple with the stuff in this work and have it ring true in any real way. And I think that was a really interesting thing, because he that gets to the point where his thing with the final scene comes down to him thinking a priest wouldn't commit what is a mortal sin that would damn him. You know?
That part of him not being sure even now, that's the thing that he's unsure of. That was one of my points that I never finished.
Yeah.
Was that cool,
then I brought it back around.
He is grabbing the possessed little girl and saying, come into me, to the devil.
Yeah.
And the film shows Father Karras's face become possessed. Mm-hmm. And then they showed this slowed down so that you could see it frame by frame. Then his face goes back to normal and he yells no. And then he chooses to kill himself.
Yes.
And Blatty insisted on it being that way. But Friedkin said, like you're saying, a priest wouldn't kill himself.
Yeah.
Because he would understand that that's a sin. But I also think that that's I will just say to Friedkin, to his point, he's also a priest who you spent the whole movie establishing to us that he had lost his faith.
And also,
so I think it's interesting to say that there's no way he would kill himself because that's a sin.
And I would say the arc of Karras as a character and what makes him the you could call him the protagonist of this movie.
Absolutely,
is that he does things that and understands that there's more gray area than the people that are older than him in the church. Like the reason why he deals with Pazuzu and better than the guy that came before him is because he does things that guy wouldn't do.
Yep.
So the fact that he does this ultimate sacrifice, which goes against and damns him personally, is a thing of him sacrificing for the greater good, which is a heroic trait, which I understand is against the Catholicism, but it's I don't have the moral reckoning problem with it that Friedkin does, but I think it's really interesting that he does. And it
that
says
he does,
so
but that
much.
he still put it in that way.
Yeah,
is very interesting.
I love seeing that, like him being able to go into this as a not trying to say anything about how Christianity is like. He wasn't trying to disprove anything he was showing on screen. He also wasn't trying to prove anything he saw on screen, but he also wasn't just leaning into it being totally ambiguous.
I think
in a frustrating way.
This is a really interesting conversation for this podcast because I listened to it in preparation for recording today, and it hasn't come up at all. But I'm glad I did it. I listened to an episode of this podcast. What number was it? You told me
360,
58 or 68,
something like that.
Where it is about the true story that The Exorcist is based on. And I just listened to it today. And this is a pretty good podcast, by the way. Yeah, I like it. I think you guys do good work.
It's nice to hear that every once in a while.
But Kyle at one point
358.
It's interesting hearing the two of you talk about exorcism. Kyle is Jewish and very openly lets us know all the time that he doesn't know anything about Christianity. He outright refuses to know anything about Christianity.
Yeah, intentionally knows nothing.
Which I love that for him.
Yeah.
That's not
he shouldn't have to. You should not be forced to know anything about Christianity as a person that lives in this world.
And you know arguably more than you want to know about Christianity.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I'm curious, so
I
don't
say
know.
arguably.
Yeah.
And the two of you are talking about exorcism, and Kyle says, why would you need that many people in the room for an exorcism? Because you say something about there being 49 witnesses and that it happened in a church. And he says, why would you need that many people in the room? And he is clearly asking it from a standpoint of someone who believes that people who are having exorcisms performed on them are actually sick or it's either a hoax or they're actually sick in some way.
They're ill physically.
That they should be seeing a doctor. And he's clearly asking it from that standpoint. And you immediately say, the more people, the more faith that you can channel. And so it strengthens the power of the priests. And that is from the church's viewpoint, that is a thing. And you say it very earnestly to Kyle, and Kyle goes, yeah, I guess I mean more if religion isn't real. It was a great little moment.
Did you feel seen because you have the same discussion with me about wrestling regularly?
Yes, yeah.
Where you try to ask me in the storyline, why are they doing this thing? And I start talking about fucking Tony Khan. Like,
really? The Bible is kayfabe.
Yeah. Oh man. So I think that's a good way to go out now that you got to cite that you listened to the podcast on air.
I listened beginning to end, boyos.
I actually went back and re-listened to the chunk on the Exorcist of our Cursed Movies episode, and
did you love it?
It was pretty good. It was
you guys do a pretty good job.
I'm not one to say stuff positively about myself.
I like this podcast. I think you guys are good.
Well, thank you. Well, if you want to find more, much like it seems like Jules might want to, I don't know. If you want to find us on social media and learn more about the podcast or listen to more episodes, we're on Twitter at IGW Podcast. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/itgetsweirdpodcast. And we're on all of your favorite podcatchers from Stitcher to Google. Actually, Stitcher died. I needed to get that out of my mental, muscle memory for this exit.
You're on Spotify.
Yeah, we're on Spotify. We're on Apple Podcasts. We're on a bunch of other. We're basically
Pocket Casts.
If you look up It Gets Weird on your favorite podcatcher. We're probably there. We also do have a Patreon with a couple different tiers. At $2, you get access to our Patreon Discord. You get episodes 2 days early on Friday as opposed to Sunday. You get a Patreon bonus show called It Gets Weird TV every other week where we watch weird TV shows. We're currently watching season 1 of The X-Files. If you want more of Jules, we just this week did the Simpsons X-Files episode as a bonus episode as well.
And much like this episode, if you enjoyed this, we're just fucking bullshitting. Man, that was just a nice conversation that we had that loosely centered around the Simpsons.
Talked about the Simpsons sometimes.
And I personally love when podcasts are like that. So if you do too, hey, when I'm on the podcast, that's usually what it's like.
Yeah, and if you want more incentive on the Patreon, I've started adding a Jules tag so you can just find all of the stuff. I need to go back and do it historically, but from the point I started it, they're all tagged. And I'm going to start doing that for guests on Patreon. So also, we have a $5 tier, which gets you bonus content every single week, plus everything else that is already on that I mentioned at the $2 tier. And it helps to support the show because we don't do ads or anything. So if you like the show and have a couple extra bucks, please go ahead and take a look at our Patreon at patreon.com/itgetsweirdpodcast, I believe. Yeah. Kyle also streams sometimes on Twitch. He'll tell you more about that once he gets back into the swing of things. It's been busy lately. But I think that's everything. Jules, do you want to plug anything?
Yeah, I have a podcast called The Outside Dive that I co-host with you. Yeah. You're there. And it's a topical wrestling podcast. And if you listened to this because you already know me from there, that's cheating and you don't get the $5.
Okay, yeah.
That's binding, okay?
Yeah.
And if you do win the $5, you should use it on the It Gets Weird Patreon.
Yeah, sure. We'll go with that. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for supporting the show. We appreciate all of the listens and downloads and talks and shares and everything that all of you do. This has been It Gets Weird, and I've been Niall.
And I am a huge fan of the film The Exorcist.